Hello everyone, Wylock here. Welcome back. Thanks for joining me. Today, I'm going to build a Noctilith crown, or attempt to mimic the model by Games Workshop. I found it to be a beautiful and intriguing model. I like that it fits in a sci-fi or fantasy setting, and I could definitely see it being used not just in my wargames, but like in my Dungeons and Dragons sessions. This thing could even be like the focal point of a campaign, so I can get a lot of mileage out of it for the work that I put into it, so I'm excited about that. Anyways, I'd like to show you how I built it. Alright, a few quick notes since I'm not big on preambles. When I talk about white PVA glue, I like to use Elmer's. Any PVA glue will work. Hot glue, I use my trusty Surebonder. I've used 8 different types of glue guns over my crafting career in the past 6 years. This is by far the best one, so Surebonder. When I refer to cardstock, I use food box leftovers, so that thickness of material, shiny on one side, sort of rough on the other. And lastly, chipboard. This is stuff I use on the channel all the time. It's the stuff you find at the back of a legal pad, but you can buy it in bulk, so there's links in the video description below to help you out with that. Alright, I think that covers the basics, so let's get into the project. And remember that our sponsor is Heroes Horde for you 3D printers out there. Excellent selection, including all True Tiles lines. These are from a kid's ring toss game. I think my wife found them at Hobby Lobby. They have some fine ridges at the periphery, should work great. However, they're basically frisbees, so there's this cavity underneath. So I traced them onto some chipboard, cut out some rings, and hot glued them in as spacers. Then I cut out 8 of these diamond sort of shapes, again from chipboard, and hot glued them in place equidistantly around the ring. Then I completed the sandwich with the other ring. This thin gap along the periphery needs to be covered up, so I used some cardstock strips for that and just hot glued them on. Same for the inside of the ring. And then in between each spike is these rows of skulls. So again, I just got strips of chipboard and hot glued those in place and made them wrap around the outer edge to the other side. And then there's these like perpendicular bolt housing things on each one of those. So I went to my beads bin and found these sort of elongated beads with glyphs on them, and I just super glued those in place. A gel control super glue on one surface and some super glue accelerant on the other creates an instant bond. And I like to be kind of generous with this. I mean, I put a good dab there so I get a lot of surface area for the cured glue. Found this package of craft jewels at the dollar store for $1. The small ones are perfect for rivets. So with tweezers and white PVA glue like Elmer's, I put 2 in between each rim feature. For the base of this thing, I started with a rectangle of cardstock that fits between 3 spikes and cut out a hole in the middle for the middle one. Then just hot glued that on. With that done, I traced this curve onto some foam board, and then I just sort of studied the model and tried to mimic the shape of the pedestal legs. With that as a master, I traced and made 4 copies. And then on cardstock, I traced it again, but I also cut away some sections from the middle, again to sort of mimic the original model. I used my new X-Acto knife for this, and I cannot believe it took me 6 years to try one out. This thing is life-changing. Anyway, then I white glued those to each foot. Then I cut some toothpick tips and hot glued those onto that lower rim, and sandwiched them with another strip of cardstock. Spikes, gotta have spikes. I pre-drilled holes with a toothpick, filled them with white glue, and then inserted toothpick tips. Next up, I chopped 3 squares. Doesn't really matter what size or shape, these are just a spacer. I stacked 3 of them together and attached a leg to each side. And now the moment of truth, hot gluing one leg at a time to that bottom curve. I have a few seconds of working time to shift it around and make sure that it's straight and parallel. And it went okay. Then it was time for more riveting, decorating up that pedestal filigree. Again, white glue, and it helped to use a toothpick to apply the glue. Don't need much. Also, notice wherever possible, I had the shiny product side of the cardstock always facing in, because that brown paper side takes glue and paint much better. Here's a chain I got from the necklace making aisle at the craft store. I'm going to attach both ends with portions of paper clip. And so again, super glue and accelerant trick. Again, you can see a kind of healthy blobs of hot glue there. I want the ends of the paper clip to really be submerged and have meaningful surface area. Watch this, it's so cool. It turns to cement right in front of your eyes. And look at this, it's already load bearing. The other end I attached to the feet. Again, 2 pre-drilled holes, but using hot glue this time. I wanted speed, but super glue will melt the foam and white glue takes too long. Looking at my leftover chaos bits, here's some chains and skulls from a chaos rhino. I hot glued one on each side. Then I whipped up these skull plaques in 3ds Max and 3D printed them, and white glued them onto those ribs on the ring. Lastly, I measured out a cardstock ring to fit over the green part, but chopped away those rib portions and cut each panel in 2. It's easier to just show this than to describe. There, see, 2 panels between each rib, just hot glued on. And outside for primer. Lately I prefer gray primers no matter what I'm doing. They just seem to be the most durable and give the fullest coverage and the fastest dry time. One thing I forgot to mention and forgot to film. Anywhere you see white foam board, I painted over with a healthy coat of white PVA glue and let it dry. This was to protect it from the accelerant in the spray paint. Looking good, all primed up, and now painting. I'm going to start with this pavement color. It's a really dark gray, and I wanted to tint it slightly, and I mean very slightly blue. So I added a dash of navy blue and mixed it up. Perfect. Solid base coat on the body of the ring, followed by a black wash, just a very, very diluted black acrylic paint. With that dry, I mixed in a small dash of light gray to that base color and used it to edge highlight all those panels and to dry brush all the spikes. The fibrous texture of that chipboard really does all the work for you. It's great. With a rich metallic gold color, I base coated those skull things. And with a metallic gunmetal, the entire base and the perimeter strips, basically anywhere that there's rivets or chains. All of that done, I washed the gunmetal with black. This time I actually used Army Painter Dark Tone, a proper shade instead of paint. It just gives a little better result. And on the gold bits, I used Army Painter Soft Tone, just a light brown wash, and slathered it on there. Highlighting, I dry brushed metallic silver over all the gunmetal parts. And a very light polished gold over the skulls. Then I got out this Vallejo Environmental Effect paint for doing rust. I used this to great success a few videos ago when we did the scratch-built Prometheum pipes. So I dabbed around each rivet and added some random splotches and streaks, plus hit the chains and spikes and that perimeter strip as well. And now for the runes, I simply took a metallic bronze and freehanded these. I looked at the reference art and just duplicated all those glyphs. Easy enough. For the red glow on the perimeter, I'm going to base with a dark red and then make those pulsing bright spots with an orangey sort of red. So it's to the airbrush I go, and first the base coat. By the way, this is an Iwata HPCS, outstanding airbrush, able to draw a very fine bead like this. And then just spritzed on those 3 glowing spots in each segment, just like the reference picture. First, we'll take a look at it up close, and then I'll show it to you on the table in context. Now, I was kind of laughing about this with my wife, because this model costs anywhere between $40 and $50, but to craft it, you'll only need to spend $90. If I had to guess, if I were sourcing all this material from scratch, it would be something more than $50, but I happen to have it all on hand because I'm a crafter and I've made tons of other terrain. So I got lots of leftover supplies to pick from. By and large, I am really happy with how this came out. I think it captures the original model's spirit pretty well. And it actually, up close you can see a lot of the sins, but from 3 feet away, it actually looks pretty darn good in person. So here we go, I've set up a little scene with some custodians attacking some Black Legion. Oh, and this big old terrain piece that it's sitting on with the skull and everything, I'm building that in it's either the next episode or the one after. So feel free to subscribe so you get the reminder when that comes out. I didn't plan this, but I guess it makes sense that my Black Legion ended up matching this thing pretty well color-wise. It fits right in. And I'll just read to you here directly from the Games Workshop website. It says, Noctilith crowns are brutal edifices raised up by the Chaos Space Marines to weaken the very foundations of reality. Crafted from the mysterious material known as Blackstone, these vast psychic resonators thin the veil to deadly effect. So just for those of you totally unfamiliar with like Warhammer 40k or wargaming, the presence of this model and its proximity to other models on the table affects them somehow. In this case, it's a boon to Chaos Space Marines and a malice to everyone else. I also want to relay a tip I coincidentally heard recently on the YouTube channel Miscast. The more detail you put into a build, the more you can get away with a simple or sloppy paint job. And I think for this project that rings absolutely true. If you're new to the idea of crafting for your tabletop gaming, be sure and find us on the Tabletop Crafters Guild on Facebook. Also, lots of the links in the description below, resources for you to check out. And here's 2 other projects that, based on today's project, I think you'll like. Till I see you next, I'm Wylock, make things and play games.